You stand where sunlight turns to gold on marble. The air trembles with the hum of 1,000 voices, philosophers arguing about freedom, merchants calling out prices, and children racing through the agora. But if you listen closely, beneath all that clamor, there's another kind of silence. The silence behind the marble walls, where half of Athens lived unseen. Before we go further, take a second to look around this moment in time. From wherever you're watching, maybe Athens itself, or Delhi, Lagos, São Paulo, Karachi, drop your city below. History belongs to all of us, and every time you watch, another voice joins the chorus that the ancients never imagined. If you love uncovering the stories the ruins don't tell, make sure you're subscribed, because today we're walking into the house that democracy forgot. The story doesn't begin in the agora. It begins in the dim interior of an Athenian home, where olive oil flickers in shallow lamps and dust moves through light like ash from an unseen fire. Inside, a woman kneels beside a loom, her fingers red from the thread's bite. Outside, men debate virtue. Inside, the rhythm of her shuttle becomes the pulse of confinement. Her name isn't recorded. Few women's were. But the city around her is carved into eternity with the names of men who spoke of liberty. To Athens, she was not a citizen, not a participant in law or war or vote. She was property within the household, an oikos, governed by a father, then a husband. From birth, her worth was measured not in words or deeds, but in dowries written on parchment, lines of silver, wool, and land exchanged like livestock. Lysias once wrote of a man defending his wife's chastity as he might defend a field from trespass. Demosthenes, with chilling ease, told the court that men keep mistresses for pleasure, concubines for daily care, and wives for legitimate heirs. And no one in the jury gasped. The streets of Athens glowed with white marble, but her world was the shadowed courtyard, walls high enough to keep eyes out, and doors heavy enough to remind her they could be locked. When she bathed, it was under a ceiling low enough to echo her own breath. When she prayed, it was to goddesses who had voices she did not. Even Penelope, the ideal wife sung in every home, was praised not for her mind, but for waiting. In this city of philosophers, freedom had rules, and she was not written into them. The same men who defined justice on stone tablets also defined her as a perpetual minor, incapable of owning, pleading, or deciding. Aristotle called her an unfinished man. Her husband called her my honor. Neither word belonged to her. And yet, even here, rebellion lived. Quiet, subtle, invisible. Archaeologists have found it in the grooves of kitchen floors, where small offerings of dough and oil were left for forgotten goddesses of the hearth. In painted pottery, women's hands appear not weaving but gesturing, as if caught mid-story. Somewhere between the myths and the law codes, they found a way to exist, to hum lullabies that carried the sound of resistance. By day, she managed servants, watched for the return of her husband, and listened for footsteps that might bring news or danger. By night, the house changed shape, shadows lengthened, whispers traveled farther. Sometimes she crept to the door and placed her palm on the marble, feeling the faint tremor of life outside. She could hear laughter in the street, free laughter, and wondered if liberty sounded different beyond stone. Athens boasted of its democracy, yet within its most sacred walls, half the people lived like phantoms. The contradiction was so complete it became invisible. Even the sculptors who carved goddesses in perfect form gave them eyes that never looked outward. Marble beauty, marble silence. 1,000 years later, when the ruins crumble and the philosophers are dust, the mark of her labor remains. In spindle whorls, in the soot of oil lamps, in the quiet endurance of those who were told endurance was their only virtue. History calls Athens the cradle of freedom. But every cradle, if you listen closely, is also a cage. The camera moves now, out from the dark of her chamber, through the narrow streets, back to the shining heart of the city. The same marble that once trapped her now stands in museums, touched by tourists who call it timeless. But time remembers differently. It remembers footsteps that never reach the street, prayers whispered to walls, and the countless faces behind every statue of a man who claimed to speak for all mankind. And as the scene fades, another sound begins, a drumbeat, distant, measured, like boots on dry earth. Across the Aegean, another world is waiting, harsher, colder, but no less bound by its own design. Next, we cross the sea to Sparta, where freedom took a different shape and obedience was mistaken for strength. Morning breaks over the Taygetus Mountains like a blade drawn from its sheath. The fields below are pale with mist, and through it moves a figure, a girl, barefoot, her breath visible in the cold air. She runs, not from fear, but from command. Her stride is long, her arms strong. Every heartbeat is an order obeyed. In Sparta, even dawn begins with discipline. There are no walls here, no marble sanctuaries or crowded marketplaces. The city is built like its people, austere, unadorned, all muscle and silence. While Athens measured itself in words, Sparta measured itself in endurance. And unlike any other city in Greece, its daughters were part of that equation. They wrestled, raced, and sang hymns of battle while the rest of Greece watched in disbelief. To outsiders, they were scandal and marvel in equal measure. Women who did not hide, who met men's eyes without lowering their own. Yet beneath that defiance lay obedience to something deeper, the will of the state. A Spartan woman's strength was not her own. It was the property of the polis, cultivated, hardened, and offered back to the collective like iron from a forge. She was trained to bear children the way men were trained to bear arms. Her body was a vessel of war, her womb a battlefield measured in suns. The city taught her early. Weakness was treason, tenderness a luxury Sparta could not afford. In the training grounds, dust and sweat mingled under a sun that showed no mercy. Girls sparred before elders, their movements sharp and practiced. The crack of staffs echoed against the mountains, followed by laughter that sounded too loud, too free, a sound that might have been joy, if not for the eyes watching it. Plutarch tells us they were taught songs of victory and taunts for cowardice, so that even their voices became instruments of scorn and fire. You must give birth to men, the instructors reminded them, men who do not flee. And when those sons grew, they too learned from their mothers that fear was worse than death. Before battle, a mother would hand her son his shield, bronze gleaming, weight unyielding, and say the words every Spartan child knew by heart, with it or on it. Return victorious or return as a corpse. No mother wept in public. Tears were shame. If she broke, it was in silence, behind the same walls that echoed with the hymns of discipline. Spartan women could own land, command estates, and manage slaves, privileges unknown elsewhere in Greece. But those freedoms were scaffolds, not liberty. They existed only because every man was at war, and someone had to keep the machinery of Sparta alive. While Athens women vanished behind marble doors, Spartan women stood in fields, calculating harvests and births with the same precision their husbands used for formations. Power, yes, but never choice. Imagine the nights here. The sky thick with stars, the air dry as stone, the men gone to campaign, the city pulsing with a strange quiet. A woman sits by the hearth, polishing her husband's shield, her reflection warped in its curve. Behind her, a child sleeps. She does not sing him lullabies. She whispers numbers, of fields, of rations, of years. When the flames flicker, her shadow looks almost like armor. Visitors from other Greek cities found Sparta uncanny. Women who laughed at men's jokes, who shouted in the streets, who ruled their households with iron voices. Yet those same women were praised only when they forgot themselves in service of the state. Xenophon called them mothers of heroes. Others called them dangerous. The truth lay somewhere between. disciplined into strength until even gentleness became a weapon. When a messenger brought word of a son's death, a Spartan mother would not tear her hair or wail. She would stand, straighten her shoulders, and ask, "Was he brave?" If the answer was yes, she smiled. If no, she turned away. In this city, emotion was not human, it was civic, the heartbeat in rhythm with the drum of the phalanx. What outsiders mistook for freedom was something colder. To be strong in Sparta was to be consumed by it. The women were not ornaments, but cogs in an unending war machine that devoured its own and called it glory. Theirs was not equality, but conscription by another name. Still, they endured, and in that endurance a kind of terrible grace was born, the grace of those who have been told there is no other way to live. Their songs lingered long after their voices vanished, their pride etched into the stones of a city that forgot how to feel. Centuries later, when ruins scatter across the valley and the wind whistles through the broken temples, it carries a sound that could almost be breathing, or remembering. The ghosts of the girls who ran at dawn still move across the plain, their feet striking dust, their hearts striking obedience. And as the sun sets over Sparta's empty fields, the frame holds still. A woman alone, silhouetted against red light, her face unreadable. She is both myth and warning. Because what Sparta proved, and the world keeps forgetting, is that even strength can be another name for captivity. Next, we move from bronze to marble once more, from Sparta's discipline to the quiet sanctuaries of Delphi, where questions were currency and gods spoke through smoke. The sun bleeds slowly across the Acropolis. Marble turns to honey, shadows stretch like old prayers, and high above the city, goddesses gaze forever east, eyes fixed on eternity, unmoving, unblinking. Athena stands with her spear lifted toward the sky, her face calm, almost tender. To the people below, she was the mind of the city, the protector, the mother of wisdom. But beneath her marble feet, the real mothers of Athens moved through silence and dust. Their names are gone, their bodies scattered, but their work endures. In the faint grooves on loom weights, in fingerprints pressed into clay, in the soot of hearths that once burned behind closed doors. Archaeologists have found them everywhere and nowhere. The women who served the temples, who ground grain for sacrifices they could not afford, who swept the altars clean after men had gone. For every goddess the Greeks immortalized, they buried 1,000 women without a word. At the foot of the Parthenon, the air is still thick with reverence. Incense rises, bells tremble, and a chorus of boys chants hymns that once belonged to women. Across the centuries, marble has kept its memory better than flesh. You can almost hear the faint echo, the murmur of slaves preparing offerings, their voices low, their movements rehearsed until worship became labor. Athena's city deified the feminine in stone while denying it in life. It crowned its wisdom with a woman's face, then outlawed women's speech in its assemblies. In the cool light of the temples, the divine was female. But outside, the living female was invisible. What kind of faith builds altars to its own absence? Down in the sanctuaries, where the marble gives way to earth, smaller shrines tell the other story, the private one. A clay figurine of Demeter cradling Persephone, a spindle whorl etched with an unsteady hand, a tiny altar blackened by soot and hope. These were the gods of the enslaved, the forgotten, the poor. Their offerings were crumbs of bread, drops of oil, strands of hair, the smallest pieces of a life given freely because nothing else could be given. In one grave near Piraeus, the bones of a young woman lie curled like a question. Her spine shows years of labor, her wrists broken and healed wrong. Beside her rests a small bronze pin, worn, common, touched by sweat. Scholars call her anonymous, but her story is more complete than most. She lived beneath the marble world, unseen by the philosophers who debated freedom above her head. Her death was quiet, but her bones still speak. Of work without rest, of gods who looked away. Once a year, the women of Athens emerged, not as citizens but as vessels of ritual. The Thesmophoria, 3 days of fasting, chanting, and descent into pits where offerings of decay were left for Demeter. Men were forbidden to watch. It was the one time the city gave women a public voice, only to bind it to the cycle of fertility and rot. They sang not for themselves, but for the earth. And when it was over, they returned to their walls, the echoes fading like smoke. Some believed these rituals were power, a secret sisterhood within a world of men. Others saw them as chains disguised as devotion. Either way, they reveal the fracture running through the Greek soul, the need to honor what they refuse to understand. Imagine the temple at night, the oil lamps low, the marble cold beneath bare feet. A priestess, maybe free, maybe enslaved, stands before the statue of Athena, her face illuminated by a single flame. "Great goddess," she whispers, "teach me strength." The stone does not answer. Only the wind moves, humming through columns like breath through a hollow body. The next morning, the same priestess scrubs the steps clean. The same women who offered incense must also carry water, sweep dust, and feed the fires that made the gods visible. Piety was work, and faith was endurance. To serve the divine was to erase yourself before it. Centuries later, when the temples crumble and the statues fall, it is the fragments that remain most human. The chipped hand of a goddess, the worn threshold of a shrine, the faint red pigment still clinging to a carved lip. Even broken, they remember what perfection forgot, that devotion and destruction often share the same gesture. Athena still stands, head unbowed, her eyes wide over the city that bears her name. But now the tourists pass beneath her, their cameras flashing like lightning in miniature. Few notice the small museum cases below, where spindle whorls, hairpins, and burnt offerings lie arranged in quiet rows. These are the voices of the forgotten, the women who prayed for mercy from gods that looked like them, yet never listened. The camera lingers on one offering, a simple terracotta figurine, its surface cracked, its shape barely human. It was found buried under a hearth beside the ashes of a house that burned 2,000 years ago. Someone placed it there with care, perhaps to protect what could not be protected. The archaeologists who uncovered it called it ritual debris. But the fingers that shaped it would have known it as something else, a plea, a prayer, a fragment of faith pressed into earth when words failed. Up close, its face is uneven, the eyes 2 shallow hollows, the mouth a faint curve as if caught between speech and silence. The clay still carries the faint marks of a thumbnail, a reminder that it was made not by gods, but by hands. Hands that cooked, wove, buried, held. The camera moves closer still, tracing the contours of this fragile body, and for a heartbeat, it feels alive. Dust drifts like smoke around it, and the light wavers as if the figurine might blink. Outside, the ruins hum with the wind. The temples above remain untouched, their columns straight and proud, their deities still gleaming in marble calm. But down here, among the broken tiles and burned foundations, history feels different. Less like glory, more like endurance. Every fragment whispers a name no record kept. Every layer of soil is a story rewritten by fire and forgetting. Perhaps the woman who hid the figurine did so in desperation. Her home collapsing, the air thick with ash, the gods silent. Perhaps she knelt before the flames, pressed this little shape into the earth, and said nothing, because there was nothing left to say. When the fire consumed everything, her offering survived. It outlasted her house, her bloodline, her city, and now it sits behind glass, watched by strangers who see an artifact, not a memory. As the frame tightens, the wind rises again through the ruins. The goddesses stand still, their silence absolute, and somewhere far below, in the soil that once held so many unnamed lives, a question still breathes upward through the centuries. Soft, patient, unending. What use is divinity if even the divine forgets what it means to be human. The camera fades to black, but the echo lingers. The sound of wind through marble, of prayers no longer waiting for an answer.